Willow Spring, Wyoming Territory, 1887. Margaret Wilson clutched her threadbare carpet bag to her chest as the train lurched to a halt, steam billowing past the windows. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a mixture of terror and desperate hope. After 3 days of travel from St. Louis, she would finally meet Vincent Quincy, the man whose advertisement in the Matrimonial Times had promised a new beginning far from the ashes of her old life. Willow Springs Station. 10-minute stop, the conductor called, moving through the passenger car with efficient strides. Margaret furrowed her brow, consulting the crumpled letter in her hand. "Excuse me, sir," she said, catching the conductor's sleeve. "I believe there must be some mistake. I'm bound for Whitewater Creek." The conductor glanced at her ticket. "Whitewater Creek's another 40 miles west, ma'am. Next stop tomorrow morning." Her stomach sank. "But I've no place to stay tonight, and my fiancé is expecting me today." "Sorry, ma'am. You could send a telegraph from the station office." Margaret nodded, gathering her things with trembling hands. She would step onto the platform, send a message to Mr. Quincy explaining her predicament, and wait for tomorrow's train. One more night wouldn't matter after traveling so far. The platform was sparse, just a few local farmers loading crates of produce and a harried-looking station master. Margaret made her way toward the telegraph office when a high, clear voice stopped her in her tracks. Mama's here." She turned to see a small girl, perhaps 5 years old, in a faded calico dress, her blonde hair escaping from 2 messy braids. The child was running full tilt across the platform, her face alight with joy. Margaret glanced behind her, expecting to see some other woman, but there was no one. The little girl barreled straight into her skirts, wrapping thin arms around her legs. "You came back. Papa said you might not remember us, but I told him you would." A tall man in a well-worn duster hurried after the child, his face a mask of embarrassment. "Charlotte, that's not." His voice died as he approached, his blue eyes widening beneath the brim of his hat. Margaret stared back, momentarily speechless. The man before her was easily the most handsome she had ever seen, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and shoulders broad beneath his simple shirt. But it was the pain in his eyes that caught and held her, a pain she recognized all too well. "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am," he said, crouching to pull the child away. "Charlotte, this lady isn't your mother. Remember what we talked about?" The little girl's face crumpled. "But she looks just like Mama in the picture." "I'm so sorry," Margaret said softly. "My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm actually lost. I was meant to go to Whitewater Creek." The man straightened, tipping his hat. "Victor Quinn, ma'am. Local rancher." He hesitated. "Whitewater Creek, you say?" "Yes. I'm to be married to a Mr. Vincent Quincy." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. A mail-order arrangement. Something flickered across Victor's face. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. He cleared his throat. "Whitewater Creek's a fair distance. Train won't be through till tomorrow." "So I've been told," Margaret replied, adjusting her grip on her bag. Charlotte tugged at her father's coat. "Can she stay with us, Papa? Please." "Charlotte, we have the spare room, and it's all clean 'cause Mrs. Potts helped yesterday, and that's enough, Charlotte." Victor's tone was gentle but firm. He turned to Margaret. "The boarding house in town is decent enough, though it fills quickly on train days." Margaret nodded, fighting back a wave of exhaustion. The prospect of searching for lodging in a strange town, with her few remaining dollars carefully counted, made her shoulders sag. Victor must have noticed, for he softened. "Or my daughter's right. We do have a spare room, and we're heading back to the ranch now. It's a simple place, but clean and comfortable. You'd be welcome to stay the night." "I couldn't impose. It's no imposition. It's the Christian thing to do." He offered a small smile. "Besides, Charlotte here would never forgive me if I let her mama sleep at the boarding house." Margaret knew she should refuse. A proper lady would never accept lodging from a strange man, even with his daughter present. But the genuine kindness in his eyes and the hopeful look on Charlotte's face weakened her resolve. "That's very generous, Mr. Quinn. If you're certain it's no trouble." "None at all." He picked up her carpet bag before she could protest. "Our wagon's this way." As they walked, Charlotte slipped her small hand into Margaret's, chattering about the ranch and her pony named Buttercup. Margaret felt a curious warmth spreading through her chest. She had left St. Louis with nothing but ashes behind her, her teaching position lost when the school closed, her meager savings depleted by her father's medical bills, and finally, his funeral. Vincent Quincy had offered a practical solution, a marriage of convenience, a home for her, and a mother for his children. Now, walking beside Victor Quinn and his daughter, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Victor's ranch was modest but neat, a sturdy two-story house with a wide porch and outbuildings clustered nearby. Charlotte bounded up the steps as they arrived, eager to show Margaret every corner. "This is where we eat, and Papa's chair is the big one. And this is where I do my lessons," she explained, pulling Margaret through the main room. "And upstairs is my room and Papa's room and the room that was Mama's sewing room, but now it's for guests, which is you." Victor set down her bag, his expression apologetic. "Charlotte, give Miss Wilson a moment to catch her breath." Margaret smiled. "It's quite all right. Your home is lovely, Mr. Quinn." "Thank you." He removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair in need of a trim. "I built most of it myself after my wife, after Elizabeth passed. Added the second story last year." "I'm sorry for your loss," Margaret said quietly. Victor nodded, a familiar shadow crossing his face. "It's been 3 years. Consumption." Charlotte tugged at Margaret's skirt. "Do you want to see my room? I have a dolly that looks like you." Margaret allowed herself to be led upstairs, giving Victor a moment of privacy. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and curtains that matched those in the main room downstairs. "This was Mama's special room," Charlotte confided, touching the quilt reverently. "Papa says she used to make pretty dresses in here." "It's a beautiful room," Margaret said, setting down her reticule on the bedside table. "Your mother must have been very talented." "She was the prettiest and nicest mama ever," Charlotte said solemnly. "But she had to go to heaven. Papa said God needed her up there." Margaret knelt to the child's level. "I'm sure she was wonderful, and I'm sure she loved you very much." Charlotte's blue eyes, so like her father's, filled with tears. "I don't really remember her much anymore. Just from the picture." She hesitated. "You really do look like her. That's why I thought." Margaret's heart ached. "I understand, but I'm not your mama, Charlotte. I'm just a lady who got on the wrong train." The little girl nodded sadly. "Are you really going to marry someone in Whitewater Creek?" "That's my plan, yes." "Is he nice? Does he have children too?" Margaret realized with a start that she didn't know. Vincent Quincy's letters had been formal, businesslike. He had mentioned needing a wife to help manage his household, but had shared few personal details. "I believe he's a very respectable man," she said carefully. "And I don't know if he has children, but I hope to find out soon." Charlotte wrinkled her nose. "Papa says I shouldn't ask so many questions." "I'm being rude." "Not at all," Margaret assured her. "It's good to be curious about the world." From downstairs, Victor's voice called up. "Charlotte, Miss Wilson, supper will be ready soon." Over a simple but hearty meal of beefsteak, potatoes, and early summer greens, Margaret learned more about the Quinns. Victor had come west from Pennsylvania after the war, homesteading his land and slowly building it into a respectable ranch. Elizabeth had been the schoolteacher in Willow Spring until her illness made teaching impossible. "Papa's terrible at arithmetic," Charlotte confided, earning a mock-stern look from her father. "Mrs. Potts helps me sometimes, but she's old and doesn't remember all the new ways." "Charlotte," Victor warned. "It's true. She taught you when you were little, Papa, and that was a long time ago." Margaret couldn't help laughing. "I was a teacher in St. Louis," she offered. "Perhaps I could help you with your lessons before I leave tomorrow?" Charlotte's face lit up. "Really? Could you? If your father doesn't mind." Victor studied her for a moment, something unreadable in his gaze. "That would be kind of you, Miss Wilson. Charlotte's education is important to me, even out here." Later, as Charlotte recited her multiplication tables at the kitchen table, Margaret noticed Victor watching them from his chair by the fire, a book open but unread in his lap. When she caught his eye, he quickly looked down, but not before she saw something like longing cross his face. After Charlotte was tucked into bed, Margaret joined Victor on the porch, where he offered her a cup of coffee. The evening was cool, stars pricking the vast Wyoming sky. "You're good with her," he said quietly. "Patient. She's a delightful child, bright and curious." Victor nodded, his profile strong against the twilight. Elizabeth would be proud of her. She wanted Charlotte to have every opportunity, even out here. "It can't be easy, raising her alone." He shrugged one shoulder. "We manage. Mrs. Potts from town helps when she can, but she's getting on in years." Charlotte needs. He trailed off, then cleared his throat. Well, we all have our burdens to bear. Yes, Margaret agreed softly, thinking of her own losses. We do. If you don't mind my asking, Victor said after a moment, how does a lady like yourself end up as a mail-order bride? You're obviously educated, well-spoken. Margaret stared into her coffee cup. My father was a professor. He believed in education for women, but not much else. When he fell ill, I took a teaching position to support us, but the school closed last winter. After he passed, there were debts. She swallowed. Mr. Quincy's advertisement seemed practical. He offered security, a home. At my age, with no prospects in St. Louis. Your age? Victor looked genuinely puzzled. You can't be more than 25. 27, she corrected, with a small smile. Practically a spinster. Victor shook his head. Out here, a woman who can read, write, and manage a household is worth her weight in gold, regardless of age. Is that why you haven't remarried? No suitable candidates in Willow Spring. The moment the words left her mouth, Margaret regretted them. I'm sorry. That was terribly forward of me. To her surprise, Victor chuckled. No, it's a fair question. Truth is, Charlotte needs a mother. And well, I suppose I could use the help. But I won't marry just anyone. Elizabeth and we had something rare. Something true. He looked out at the darkened ranch. Hard to settle for less, once you've known that. Margaret nodded, understanding completely. Though she had never known that kind of love herself, she had watched her parents' marriage of convenience. Respectful, but cold. It was precisely the kind of arrangement she had resigned herself to with Vincent Quincy. And what of your Mr. Quincy? Victor asked, his tone carefully neutral. Have you met him before? No. We've exchanged letters for 3 months. And you're certain he's a good man? Margaret hesitated. His letters are well written. He seems industrious, God-fearing. But no, I'm not certain of anything. She offered a wan smile. Except that I have few options and no way back. Victor was quiet for a long moment. There are always options, Miss Wilson. Always. She wondered if she imagined the gentle emphasis in his words, or the way his eyes lingered on her face in the lantern light. Morning came too quickly. Margaret woke to the sounds of a working ranch, distant cattle lowing, the cluck of chickens in the yard, Victor's deep voice calling instructions to someone outside. For a moment, she lay still, absorbing the peaceful rhythm of it all. Charlotte knocked on her door just as she finished dressing, eager to show Margaret how to collect eggs for breakfast. Victor was already in the barn, but the table was set and coffee brewed when they returned to the kitchen with a basket of warm brown eggs. Papa says we need to leave for town by 9 o'clock for your train, Charlotte said, her earlier enthusiasm dimmed. Do you have to go? Margaret brushed a strand of hair from the girl's cheek. I'm afraid so. I made a promise to Mr. Quincy. But you haven't even met him yet, Charlotte protested. What if he's mean? Or ugly? Or smells like old cheese? Despite herself, Margaret laughed. Charlotte Quinn, that's a terrible thing to say. Well, it's possible, Charlotte insisted. Papa says you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but you shouldn't buy it without reading a page either. Your papa is a wise man. He likes you, Charlotte said matter-of-factly, cracking an egg into the bowl. He didn't frown once all through supper last night. Usually he frowns when we have company. Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. He was just being polite to a guest. Charlotte gave her a look that suggested she knew better, but said nothing more. After breakfast, Victor loaded Margaret's carpet bag into the wagon. He seemed preoccupied, his usual politeness intact, but something guarded in his manner. Charlotte, by contrast, clung to Margaret's hand, extracting promises that she would write once she was settled in Whitewater Creek. The ride to town was quiet, Charlotte sandwiched between the adults on the wagon seat, occasionally pointing out landmarks or asking questions that Margaret answered as cheerfully as she could. Victor remained focused on the road, his jaw set in a firm line. At the station, they learned the train was running an hour late. I can wait with you, Victor offered, but there was something strained in his voice. That's not necessary, Margaret replied. You and Charlotte have already been so kind. I'm sure you have work to attend to. No, we can stay, Charlotte insisted. Papa, please. Victor hesitated, then nodded. We'll wait. They sat on a bench outside the station, Charlotte between them, chattering about school and her friends and everything a 5-year-old finds important. Margaret listened attentively, storing away these moments like treasures, this brief, unexpected interlude in her carefully planned journey. When the station master announced the train would be another half hour, Victor suggested they walk to the general store for refreshments. As they strolled down Willow Springs Main Street, Margaret was struck by the town's quiet charm. Though small, it boasted a proper church, a schoolhouse, and several well-maintained businesses. "It's lovely here," she remarked. "Quite different from St. Louis." "Too quiet for some," Victor replied. "But it suits us." At the general store, he bought lemonade and sugar cookies, which Charlotte consumed with enthusiastic appreciation. As they sat on the store's porch, watching the town's lazy midday activity, Margaret felt a strange reluctance growing within her. The idea of boarding the train, of continuing to Whitewater Creek and Vincent Quincy, suddenly seemed wrong, like a shoe that didn't quite fit. "Miss Wilson," Victor began, his voice low so Charlotte couldn't hear. "I know it's not my place, but—" The distant whistle of the approaching train cut him off. Charlotte's head snapped up, her face falling. "It's coming," she whispered. "You're really leaving?" Margaret nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "I must." Victor stood, offering his hand to help her up. His touch lingered a moment longer than necessary. "We should head back to the platform." The walk back to the station felt both too long and too short. Margaret's mind raced. What was she doing? Rushing toward a marriage with a stranger when here, in this little town she'd never meant to visit, she had found. What, exactly? A kind man and his sweet daughter? A momentary respite from her loneliness? It wasn't enough reason to abandon her plans, her commitment to Vincent Quincy. The train pulled into the station with a screech of metal and a cloud of steam. Passengers began disembarking, a young couple, an older gentleman, a woman with 2 small children. And then, striding purposefully onto the platform, a tall man in an expensive suit, scanning the station with irritated eyes. Margaret froze, recognition flooding through her from the single daguerreotype he had sent with his letters. "Vincent," she whispered. Victor followed her gaze. "Quincy? Here." The well-dressed man spotted them, his expression shifting from annoyance to relief. He approached quickly, hat in hand. "Miss Wilson?" "Margaret Wilson." Margaret stepped forward. "Mr. Quincy, I don't understand. I received your telegraph about the mix-up. Rather than wait another day, I decided to come collect you myself." He looked her up and down with an assessing gaze. "You're as lovely as your letters suggested." Victor stiffened beside her, and Charlotte pressed against his leg, suddenly shy. "That was very considerate of you," Margaret managed. Vincent Quincy was handsome enough, she supposed, tall and well-groomed, with a confident bearing. But there was something cold in his eyes, calculating. "I've arranged for a private compartment for our return journey," Vincent continued. "We can be back in Whitewater Creek by evening and have the ceremony tomorrow. Pastor Jenkins has already been notified." "Tomorrow?" Margaret echoed. "That's rather sudden." Vincent frowned slightly. "I thought you understood the arrangement, Miss Wilson. My household requires immediate attention. The children need—" "Children?" Margaret interrupted. "You never mentioned children in your letters." For the first time, Vincent looked discomfited. "Didn't I? 3 of them. My first wife passed last year. Influenza." Margaret felt Victor shift beside her, a nearly imperceptible movement closer to her side. "I see," she said carefully. "And how old are your children, Mr. Quincy?" "The boys are 10 and 8. The girl is 6. He waved a dismissive hand. "They're at home with the housekeeper, who is eager to be relieved of her extra duties. Now, if you'll gather your things, Mr. Quincy," Margaret said, finding her voice growing steadier. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. In your letters, you spoke of needing help managing your household. You never once mentioned that I would be expected to mother 3 grieving children." Vincent's expression hardened. "I assumed it was understood. Why else would a man of my position seek a wife through correspondence, if not for practical reasons? Surely you didn't imagine this was a love match." Charlotte gasped at the harshness in his tone, and Victor placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "No," Margaret said quietly. "I had no such illusions. But I did expect honesty." "I have been entirely honest about what matters," Vincent retorted. "I offer financial security, a respectable home, and my name. In exchange, I expect a proper household and maternal care for my children. It's a fair arrangement, especially for a woman of your circumstances." Margaret felt as though she had been slapped. "My circumstances?" An aging spinster with no fortune and no connections? Vincent's smile was thin. Let's not pretend you have better prospects awaiting you elsewhere. Victor stepped forward, his expression thunderous. That's enough, Quincy. Vincent turned cold eyes to him. And you are? Victor Quinn. Miss Wilson has been a guest in my home since the misunderstanding with the train. How convenient for you, Vincent said, his tone implying something improper. Well, I appreciate you providing temporary accommodation, but Miss Wilson and I have an agreement, and the train for Whitewater Creek leaves in 20 minutes. Margaret looked between the two men, Vincent with his expensive suit and demanding eyes, Victor with his work-worn hands and steady gaze. Then she looked down at Charlotte, who was watching her with a mixture of fear and hope. In that moment, clarity washed over her like a spring rain. Mr. Quincy, she said firmly, I'm afraid I must decline your proposal. Vincent stared at her. I beg your pardon. Our arrangement was based on incomplete information. I cannot in good conscience enter into marriage with you under these circumstances. This is absurd. We had an agreement. I paid for your ticket west. Margaret reached into her reticule and withdrew a small purse. Here is the full amount for the ticket, plus interest. Our agreement is nullified. Vincent snatched the money, his face darkening. You'll regret this, Miss Wilson. There aren't many men willing to take on a woman of your years and situation. Perhaps not, she agreed calmly. But I'd rather face an uncertain future than a certain unhappiness. For a moment, Vincent looked as though he might argue further, but the station master called the all aboard for Whitewater Creek. With a final glare at Victor, he turned on his heel and strode back to the train. As the train pulled away from the station, Charlotte tugged at Margaret's skirt. Does this mean you're staying? Margaret knelt to the child's level. I don't know, Charlotte. I hadn't planned that far ahead. Where will you go? Victor asked quietly. Margaret straightened, facing him directly. I'm not sure. Perhaps Denver or Cheyenne. Somewhere I might find a teaching position. Victor rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she had come to recognize as nervousness. Willow Springs School is without a teacher. Mrs. Potts has been filling in, but as Charlotte will tell you, she's getting on in years. The school board's been looking for months, Charlotte added eagerly. Nobody wants to come all the way out here. Margaret's heart quickened. Are you suggesting? The town council meets tomorrow, Victor said. I sit on the board. I could put your name forward, if you're interested. The position includes lodging, the old schoolmistress's cottage. It's small but sound, and it's right next to our ranch. Charlotte added, we could see you every day. Margaret felt a smile blooming. I would be very interested, Mr. Quinn. Good. He offered her a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. In the meantime, our spare room is yours for as long as you need it. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. As they walked back to the wagon, Charlotte between them, Margaret felt something settle in her heart, a rightness she had never expected to find when she stepped off the train in the wrong town. By Christmas of 1887, Margaret Wilson had established herself as an indispensable part of Willow Spring. The school thrived under her guidance, enrollment growing as word spread of her teaching abilities. Her cottage, once sparse and utilitarian, became a warm haven with Victor and Charlotte's help. Victor rebuilding the sagging porch and Charlotte insisting on curtains for every window. The three of them fell into an easy rhythm. Sundays after church, Margaret joined them for dinner. Weekday evenings, Victor often appeared at her door with Charlotte and some small offering, fresh eggs, a cut of beef, wildflowers Charlotte had gathered. They would sit on her porch in the warm months, or around her small stove in the cold ones, talking about everything and nothing. By spring, the whole town was speculating about when Victor Quinn would finally court the schoolteacher properly. Mrs. Potts had taken to sighing loudly whenever she saw them together, and Reverend Thompson had twice mentioned the virtues of marriage in sermons that seemed directed at their pew. But Victor remained scrupulously proper, and Margaret, though her feelings had grown into something deep and true, respected his hesitation. He had loved deeply once and lost. Such wounds healed slowly, if at all. Then came the evening of the Founder's Day dance, when Charlotte fell ill with a fever. Margaret insisted on staying with her while Victor attended the meeting portion of the event, where his presence as a town councilman was required. Are you certain? He asked, standing awkwardly in his best shirt and string tie. I can send my regrets. Absolutely certain, Margaret assured him. already settling beside Charlotte's bed with a cool cloth. "We'll be fine, won't we, Charlotte?" The little girl nodded weakly, her usual energy dimmed by illness. Victor reluctantly departed, promising to return as soon as possible. The hours passed quietly, with Margaret reading to Charlotte until she fell into a fitful sleep. Outside, spring rain began to fall, pattering against the roof in a soothing rhythm. When Victor returned, his clothes damp from the rain, his eyes sought Margaret's immediately. "How is she?" "Better," Margaret whispered. "Her fever broke about an hour ago. She's sleeping peacefully now." Relief washed over his face. He crossed to the bed, placing a gentle hand on his daughter's forehead. "Thank God. Children are resilient," Margaret said, rising from her chair. "She'll likely be running circles around us both by morning." Victor straightened, his eyes never leaving Margaret's face. "I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need. I care for her too." "I know." He took a step closer. "That's what I realized tonight, sitting through that interminable meeting. You care for her. For this place." He hesitated. "For me?" Margaret's breath caught. "Yes," she said simply. "I do." "I've been a fool," Victor said, his voice low and intense. "Letting fear keep me from what's been right in front of me for months." "Not a fool," Margaret corrected gently. "Just a man who loved well and lost deeply." "I understand." "Do you?" He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Do you understand that I've fallen in love with you, Margaret Wilson? That every day I don't tell you feels like a day wasted?" Joy bloomed in her chest, warm and bright. "I think I'm beginning to." "I never expected this," he continued, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "Never thought I'd find someone who could make me feel this way again. Someone who makes Charlotte light up like the 4th of July. Someone who fits into our lives as if she was always meant to be there." "Victor," she whispered, hardly daring to believe. "I'm asking this all wrong," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "I should be down on one knee, with flowers and pretty speeches. But seeing you here, caring for my child as if she were your own, I can't wait another day." He squeezed her hands. "Margaret Wilson, will you marry me? Will you make our family complete?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." He gathered her into his arms, his kiss gentle at first, then deepening with a promise of all that was to come. When they broke apart, both breathless, a small voice came from the bed. "It's about time," Charlotte murmured, her eyes still closed but a smile playing on her lips. Victor laughed, the sound rich and free. "Were you pretending to be asleep, young lady?" One blue eye opened. "Only a little bit." "Did Miss Wilson really say yes? Is she going to be my mama for true?" Margaret moved to sit on the edge of the bed, taking Charlotte's small hand in hers. "If that's what you want, sweetheart." "More than anything," Charlotte said fervently, pushing herself up against her pillows. "I've been praying for it every night." Victor sat beside them, one arm around Margaret's waist. "Have you now?" "And here I thought I was being original." "Papa," Charlotte said with the exaggerated patience of a child addressing a particularly slow adult. "Everyone in town has been waiting for you to ask her. Mrs. Potts said you were being as slow as Christmas." Margaret laughed, leaning into Victor's embrace. "It seems we're the last to know." "Not quite," Victor murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I think I've known since the day you stepped off that train. I just needed time to be brave enough to admit it." "I'm glad you found your courage," she whispered. Charlotte yawned hugely. "Can we have the wedding soon?" "Before harvest." "We'll see," Victor said, tucking the blankets around her. "Now back to sleep, little one. You need your rest." As Charlotte drifted off again, Victor and Margaret remained beside her, hands intertwined, hearts full. "When I got on the wrong train that day," Margaret said softly, "I thought it was the worst mistake of my life." Victor lifted their joined hands to his lips. "And now," she smiled, the joy within her too vast for words. "Now I know it was the moment everything finally went right." They were married in June of 1888 in the little white church of Willow Spring, with Charlotte proudly serving as flower girl. The schoolhouse closed for a week of celebration, and the entire town turned out for the festivities. Margaret wore a dress of pale blue silk, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Victor couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle, his face alight with a happiness many thought they'd never see again after Elizabeth's passing. After the ceremony, Charlotte presented Margaret with a hand-drawn picture of the three of them, standing before the ranch house with hearts floating overhead. Across the bottom, in careful letters, she had written, "My family." "Do you like it?" she asked anxiously. Mrs. Potts helped me spell family. Margaret knelt, heedless of her fine dress, and gathered the child close. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received. And I can really call you Mama now?" For true, Margaret promised, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. That night, after the celebration ended and Charlotte was tucked into bed with dreams of the family they had become, Victor led his bride to their room. The master bedroom he had expanded and brightened over the winter months in preparation for this day. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," he whispered, drawing her into his arms. Margaret smiled up at him, love and certainty flowing through her veins like honey. "I've been home since the day I stepped off that train," she said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "I just didn't know it yet." As the stars wheeled over the Wyoming night, two people who had known loss and loneliness found in each other the greatest blessing of all, a love neither had expected, born of a simple mistake, a little girl's faith, and the courage to begin again. The mail-order bride who stepped off at the wrong station had found, against all odds, exactly where she was meant to be.